In this tutorial, we're going to have a look at 2D arrays in Java, but before we begin, I actually want to cover nested loops in Java. And the reason is because I've seen new programmers get more tripped up over the nested loops and the concepts there than they have with the concepts of 2D arrays. Also understand that Java really doesn't have 2D arrays in the traditional sense, but instead we have an array of arrays. But for simplicity, I'll just call them 2D arrays. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, to begin with, I'll go ahead and declare one of these 2D arrays. And you can see that it's going to be very similar to how we declared a 1D array, except I have an extra pair of these brackets. I also have to specify the name of the array, and we'll call it my array just like we did last time. And then also specify the dimensions that I want this to be. So if you like to think of this being a 2D array, what I'm really saying is that I have 3 rows of 4 elements each. I'll go ahead and just sketch some of this out real quick so you can see what I'm talking about. But I'll put y on the outside, and this will indicate what row we're working with. So y starts out as 0, so long as y is less than 3, y++. And then on the inside of this, I'll have what's actually going to go across each column. And I'll say int x starts out at 0, so long as x is less than 4, x++. And we'll do the same kind of thing. Now I'm going to put some strange looking kind of printout here, but I'm doing it on purpose and I want to run it so that you can see how this thing is actually behaving. And we're going to kind of painstakingly go through this just to make sure that you understand how this works, and then we can dive into the 2D arrays. All right, so what I'll do on the inside of this is simply just to print. I'll say system.out.print, and I'm going to print out coordinates, or something that looks like coordinates. So you're going to see a lot of screwy stuff here. I'll put an opening parenthesis, and then that'll be followed by an x, followed by a comma, because we're printing out coordinates, followed by y, followed by the closing parenthesis, and then maybe a space right there. Okay, and then I'll drop down after this inner for loop and system.out.println just so that we have an extra, let's try that again, just so that we have an extra line that it drops down after each row that it prints out. All right, now if I were to run this, you're going to see that we get this coordinate pair. So we have 0, 0, 1 over 0 down, 2 over 0 down, 3 over 0 down, and then 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, and so on. Okay? Now how is this working? Well, if we were going to trace through this, we start on the outer loop here on line 6, and we set the value of y, our counter, to be 0. And so long as y is less than 3, which it is, then we're going to kick into this inner loop that's going to execute between lines 7 and 9 right here. So as y has the value 0, we're going to create an additional counter called x that also starts out at 0. So that's what prints out this 0, 0 right here. Now what happens is we're still on this inner for loop, so x++ is going to mean that x is now going to equal 1. And we still print out all of the same kind of stuff that we had, but now it's going to print out 1, 0, because x is 1 and y is 0. We increment x again, and now x is going to be 2, and when we print out this time, we're going to have 2, 0. And you can see this is going to continue on 4, 3, 0, and then it's going to drop down to the next line. At this point, now 7 through 9 has finished running. We can print out system.out.println, and it's going to drop down to the next line, and then we go back up here to line 6, incrementing y by 1. So y is now 1, and 1 is less than 3, so we come in and execute this loop again. So in this case, y is 1, x is going to start out at 0, which is why we get 0, 1 right here. We increment x again, x is now 1, so we get 1, 1, and then 2, 1, and then 3, 1. And the same thing happens again, y is incremented, and then we run this nested loop here on the inside again. Okay, so it's really important that you understand this, and I think you probably see why this is so important, because this is how we're actually going to hit each slot inside of this 2D array. All right, so knowing that, let's kind of do the same thing that we did in the 1D tutorial where we coded everything up. And I'll start with a print function and come up here and say public static void print array. We'll even give it the same name. Okay, and in this case, it's going to take in a 2-dimensional array. So we'll say int bracket, 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 r. And what are we going to do here on the inside? Well, actually, because I'm lazy, I'll come over here and copy this code right here, and I'll paste it. And the only thing that really needs to change is what we put right here. So I'll say system.out.println, or I'm sorry, .print, and say r of y, r of x right there, plus we'll print out this little special symbol so that things are separated. That's the pipe symbol right above the enter key on most keyboards. Okay. Also notice that we've got r right here. We've also specified r right there, so that should match up. And then we finish it out with a println right here. Okay, so let's do this. We don't necessarily need this code, but I'll leave it there anyway. Okay, and we'll call the print array function. So I'll say print array, and we will pass it my array. And we would expect that we'd get a whole bunch of zeros to pop up on the screen. So if this works, I'll run it. And then you can see that we get kind of this 2D grid of zeros, which is exactly what we wanted. And now we've kind of visualized what's going on internally in memory. And I think now you can see that we have an array of arrays. So we have 3 rows, and inside of each one of these things we have 4 elements. Okay, so how would we initialize our array? Well, what I'll do out of pure laziness is to copy this, and then I'll come down here and paste it, and instead of print array, let's call it init array, just like we did last time. And then on the inside of this, you can see that we've got this kind of backwards looking r of y x syntax that's in here. You may ask why it's y x instead of x y, and think about what's going on. Y is going from 0 up to 2, right? And so we have 0, 1, 2 rows that are down here, and then x is actually scanning across each one of those rows, and that's why it goes from 0 to 3, and so that's why we have this kind of inverted looking, opposite looking thing in terms of the syntax. Okay, so what are we going to put inside of each of these slots? Well, how about we build a multiplication table? So I could just say each slot gets its indices multiplied together. And we can get rid of this println. No, we'll go ahead and leave, well, we'll go ahead and leave the println, sure. Okay, so what we'll do is to initialize the array, something like this, followed by a semicolon. And now instead of getting a bunch of zeros, I'm going to get a multiplication table. And again, remember, we have a whole bunch of zeros that are there. So in this first row, we're going to have nothing but zeros because anything multiplied by 0 is 0. But then it gets a little bit more interesting inside here. You can see 1, 2, and 3. Right, there's our 1 row. And then right here is our 2 rows, 0, 2, 4, 6. And so we could continue this out, you know, into a 10 by 10 table if you wanted to, just by changing the values that we've put here. So that's it for 2D arrays. Hopefully you understand that we have to basically have a nested loop to be able to work most of the operations that we would work on a 2D array. And hopefully these examples can get you started working with 2D arrays.